So we, of course, want to start this morning with President Donald Trump steamed over Sessions, Attorney General Sessions, we should point out. Sources telling us that the president's frustration is mounting over the firestorm that is surrounding his attorney general.
This morning, the renewed focus on Russia is being seen as a major letdown within the administration after Trump's well-received speech to Congress last week. Now, as Sessions is set to amend his testimony on Russian contacts during the campaign, well, we're hearing new details on the uproar inside the Oval Office.
Also, reaction to the president's explosive and unsubstantiated wiretapping claims against President Obama. At least one Republican senator now saying he wants to know more.
I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is true, illegally, it would be the biggest political scandal since Watergate. So, it's my job as a United States Senator to get to the bottom of this.
And where is Trump's new travel ban? He originally argued it was urgently needed to stop, quote, bad dudes rushing in. Now, weeks after delays, we're hearing of an update. That's an executive order expected to come out perhaps as early as tomorrow.
So we've got our team of political correspondents and experts standing by to break down all of this news for us. We want to begin with CNN correspondent Ryan Nobles, who's live in Washington this morning. Ryan, good morning to you. What are you hearing about the mood inside the White House?
Well, Christy, good morning to you. And sources telling CNN that the president was frustrated and angry after the fallout from the revelation that Attorney General Jeff Sessions had contact with the Russian ambassador after telling a Senate panel that he had not. Now, Sessions ultimately recused himself from any investigation related to the alleged Russian interference into the election, and that was something that left the president hot. One source telling our White House team that the president felt his recusal was hasty and overkill. It led to a fiery meeting in the Oval Office where there were, quote, a lot of expletives, the president accusing his staff of fumbling the situation with Sessions. After that angry White House meeting, the president left for Florida, and it was from his Mar-a-Lago estate Saturday morning that Trump tweeted out the explosive accusation that President Obama ordered the wiretapping of his phone and Trump Tower during the campaign. Now, this is a claim that the White House is still yet to provide evidence for, and one the former President Barack Obama vehemently denies. Now, this morning, we are learning that White House counsel Don McGahn is reviewing what options are available to them to see if they can obtain records from the Justice Department that would prove that a warrant was issued to conduct surveillance on Trump or his associates. But it's important to keep in mind that protocol has normally walled the Justice Department off from such a White House request. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska, not known as a Trump supporter, issued a statement yesterday demanding that any information related to the president's claim should be released to the public. He said that we are currently, quote, in the midst of a civilization warping crisis of public trust. Christy?
So in the midst of that, possibly, want to look ahead to what we're expecting this week, because tomorrow essentially could be a big day in Washington.
Yeah, that's right, Christy. You know, for the most part, the White House expected the end of this past week and the beginning of this week to be a victory lap, a continuation of the president's successful joint address to Congress. And it could be as early as tomorrow that the president unveils that new executive order relating to travel from those Muslim majority countries that is currently being held up in court. And there's also more that's going to have to be done with this saga related to Jeff Sessions. He's going to amend his testimony to that Senate committee where he initially told them that he had not met with the Russian ambassador.
All righty. Ryan Nobles, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's continue the conversation with CNN politics reporter Eric Bradner, Julian Zelizer, a historian and professor at Princeton University, and CNN legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
All right, Eric, let me start with you. Our sources, of course, are saying that Trump's frustrated. The White House is on edge. So how can they reset the narrative this week when you've got the whole talk of Russia coming back again with Sessions, obviously going to give more explanation as to what his connections were? So how do they reset the narrative?
Right, it's going to be difficult, right? An executive order on travel, the new travel ban is going to get a lot of attention, but we've seen this time and time again when President Trump thinks he's not being defended adequately. he goes out and does it on his own, whether that means on Twitter or in front of a big supportive crowd. He sort of launches into these attacks that are sort of disconnected from the White House's policy message, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it helps muddy the water and gets journalists and others talking about something disconnected from whatever struggles he was having the day before. But this time what he's done is managed to put pressure on Republican lawmakers to say that they're going to do something to follow up on these really big claims about President Obama. And so you're already seeing Lindsey Graham and Ben Sasse, two Republican senators, say with sort of a wink and a nod that they need to investigate this. That's what the Trump supporters want to hear, but it's also what Trump critics who sort of hear that and understand what they're saying is that they're going to disprove his claim. That's what they hear too. So Trump has really sort of taken a step that takes control of the narrative away from him, in a sense.
Right. Julian, I want to bring this point up. Trump, in all of his talk, has had a rather complicated history with President Obama. And here's a quick reminder for all of us.
I think that President Obama is behind it because his people are certainly behind it.
And we are grateful to President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama for their gracious aid throughout this transition.
He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS. I have great respect. The meeting lasted for almost an hour and a half, and it could have, as far as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. Our president's the greatest divider I've ever seen. There's one line called place of birth. I'd like to see what he said.
Talk about whipsaw there. Julian, do you think that President Obama will continue to be a target for President Trump?
Yes, I think he will. President Trump started his national political career really in part with the birther movement and raising questions about where Barack Obama was born, and he's continued to make these kinds of inflammatory and conspiratorial statements throughout. There was a little balance after he was elected, a little more diplomacy, but I don't think that's really the norm. I think President Obama, former President Obama, offers President Trump a foil. And President Trump loves a foil, whether it's the media, whether it's liberal activists, or whether it's President Obama. I think he will continue to come back to him as someone who is behind the problems that he is facing in Congress and nationally, rather than looking at himself.
Danny, let's talk about the wiretapping issue that the president has brought forward. Administration officials tell us that the White House counsel is reviewing what options are available to back up Trump's wiretap claims. Could they get court records from the Department of Justice, say?
It would be difficult. More problematic is a policy issue that you would have the White House arguably interfering with a DOJ investigation if there is one. And that would be a real problem. And then you add to the fact that if this is something authorized or involving the Foreign Intelligence Services Surveillance Act and the courts, those are highly secretive, and this is the kind of information that that really could create a problem down the road, not only for disclosing this information, but for the fact that it would demonstrate what the DOJ is doing in terms of investigating foreign agents and foreign governments that may be operating inside the United States. It's the entire purpose for which the FISA courts were created.
It's interesting to note, Julian, that, with this accusation, you would have expected many Republicans to come out and speak in support of the president. But, of course, it's such an explosive accusation, many of them are not really sure what to make of it. We should point out that Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse did release a statement, in part warning of a civilization-warping crisis of public trust. That's quite a phrase. And he's calling on Trump to show evidence to support his claims. But of course, it's going to be harder for a president who is already well known for peddling conspiracy theories, right?
Right. So President Trump has depended on Republican unity in his first month plus in office, and you're starting to see some of that crack. More Republicans are now saying there needs to be some kind of investigation into the connections with Russia among his advisors. And this last claim to really allege that the former president of the United States engaged in this kind of activity without having any apparent evidence is something that's more difficult for a lot of Republicans to sit on. And some of it might be principle, but a lot of it's politics. They're looking at their constituencies and saying, this is going to be a problem for us in the midterm election. So that's how this pressure is starting to build.
In many ways. I don't know if we even have to go that far into the future. Stick around, all of you. There's plenty more to discuss right after the break.
And some dicey moments, we should point out, at a pro-Trump rally. Listen, it became an all-out brawl. We're going to tell you what police found.
Plus, as we mentioned earlier, President Trump could issue a new travel ban, that may be as early as tomorrow. Will this be a significant change from the original order, or will the White House find itself back in court? Our team of analysts standing by.
And Saturday Night Live, oh, they're back, taking on the Trump administration again, adding a few twists to, you know this, take a look at it, this classic movie.
I always say life is like a box of chocolates. Sure are a whole lot of brown ones in there.
This is the Silverado Special Edition.
This is one gorgeous truck.
Oh, did I say there was only one special edition? Because actually there's 5.
Nice. Strength and style.
It's Truck Month. Get zeroing each other's hair. Several people, including an elderly man, were pepper sprayed. Police tell CNN that several weapons were confiscated during the chaos. They found a dagger, metal pipes, bats, bricks, and 2x4s.
Well, President Trump is expected to sign an updated travel ban on certain Middle Eastern and African countries. Could happen as early as tomorrow, but an official with the Trump administration warned CNN, look, plans could change. Let's bring back Eric Bradner, Julian Zelizer, and Danny Savalos. Thank you all, gentlemen, so much for being with us. Eric, I wanted to ask you about the changes in particular when it comes to Iraq. We know that Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, the National Security Advisor, the Homeland Security Secretary, all advocating to delete Iraq from this list. How likely do you think it will be?
Right. It sounds likely at this point. So their argument is that eliminating Iraq would make it sort of easier to fight this battle against ISIS. Their argument is that there are translators, for example, who work with the U.S. military in Iraq who were affected by the travel ban. So the question is whether Iraq will be eliminated. And critics of the travel ban, of course, point out that there are similar instances you can point to from other countries included in this ban as well, and not just people who work with the U.S. military, but people who have long periods of having done business with the United States, having cooperated with the United States in terms of diplomacy, etc. So it sounds like Iraq is going to be the big change, though. That's something that several people within the Trump administration, high-ranking officials, have been pushing for.
Okay, so Danny, by extracting Iraq alone, what kind of a legal impact might that have?
In terms of choosing the countries, it's still very much within the president's or the executive branch's province. The real conflict will be to what degree, and that's what this travel ban has always really boiled down to. On one side, you have the president's statutory authority to exclude people from other countries based on national security interests. But on the other hand, as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals pointed out, this power is not absolute. The courts are designed, and they have done so for centuries, they have reviewed the constitutionality of executive orders and federal laws that are passed by Congress. And if they discriminate unlawfully, and there is a discrimination provision in federal law as well as a constitutional claim, then this new travel ban will be surely equally challenged if it's perceived as discriminating in a way that is constitutional or contrary to provisions of federal law.
All righty. Julian, this was supposed to be signed, as we said, last Wednesday. A senior administration official said they just wanted to give it time to breathe, meaning the speech that the president gave to join Congress on Tuesday, because it had seemed like such a success. What do you make of the timing? Was it smart for them to hold on to this until this week?
Well, obviously, the first thing they want to make sure is that this is not held up in court again. So part of the slowness is to make sure that the executive order is written in a way that protects itself. And part of the hope was that speech would create this political moment where people weren't focusing on the problems of the administration, but seeing President Trump as presidential. But that delay didn't work, because in the intervening moments, we're back to tweets and back to Russiagate. And so that's the context in which this executive order will now be released.
Okay, so Eric, what about this still? This DHS assessment is out there that says individuals that are radicalized are not radicalized when they come into the country, or as they're coming in, but after they've been here for a while. How will that argument in that report play out in what is in the travel ban? What's crafted?
Right. Politically, this makes it more difficult for Republicans to back the president. We've seen this, time and time again. People who are foreign policy hawks on the right are sort of eager to back a more assertive vision of U.S. military might, and so they sort of want to get behind Trump, but they see these steps as unproductive or counterproductive. And so the question is whether, there are two questions here. One is the legal issue, and one is how this sort of plays on Capitol Hill, whether Trump is able to get Republicans behind him, and that assessment does make it more difficult. It's one of several factors that have people like John McCain and the Lindsey Grahams of the world sort of hesitant to support the president.
Danny, is there any way to craft this without naming countries? Because if he extracted those countries, that would take a big legal aspect out of it, would it not?
It's not so much, some of the primary concerns are sort of the religion testing in the prior executive order, and obviously the due process concerns. I think the biggest carve-out that will insulate a new executive order would be that for lawful permanent residents, green card holders, the class of people being excluded. The more the order goes towards trying to exclude not necessarily people from specific countries, but that class of people that have never had any due process or other right to enter the country. For example, people who have never set foot in the United States who are non-visa holders. That is a group of people that are likely to have the least right to try and travel here. Not necessarily people from particular countries, although that, of course, is a very important political consideration, less so a legal one, certainly when compared to the religion testing and some of the other constitutional challenges.
All right, just a couple seconds left. Julian, do you think we're going to see this travel ban announced this week?
Yeah, I think we're going to see it announced, and I think we're going to see it challenged both politically and legally. I think what the system might be is the system that we have. It's already a very heavily vetted system. So whatever comes from the White House will be challenged, I am certain, in the coming weeks.
All righty. Julian Zelizer, Eric Bradner, Danny Savalas, we so appreciate you being here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Sessions himself recused himself from any investigation related to Trump's presidential campaign after his meetings with the ambassador Kislyak came to light. Former and current U.S. officials tell CNN the FBI was aware of the meetings because the ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, was under surveillance. Well, late on Saturday, Jeff Sessions went to Mr. Trump's Florida resort to meet with his boss. CNN's Jim Acosta explains the president is angry that Sessions' recusal upstaged Mr. Trump's address to Congress.
We can tell you that President Trump was very frustrated with his senior staff and communications team on Friday morning, just before he departed for Mar-a-Lago. According to one source that I spoke to, quote, nobody has seen him that upset, end quote. The feeling being inside the Oval Office, and we had a camera there that was rolling where you could see officials having a heated conversation with one another. The feeling inside the Oval Office, according to sources we're talking to, is that the communications team, the press team of the White House had allowed the news of Jeff Sessions recusing himself from the Trump campaign Russia investigation has sort of overtaken the narrative of the week. They were feeling very enthusiastic after the president's performance at that speech to a joint session of Congress on Tuesday. And from what we're hearing from sources, the president was very upset that Sessions had even recused himself from the case. That was something, according to one source, that the president thought was hasty and overkill. He was hot. He was exasperated over this because he felt that basically they were just giving their adversaries up on Capitol Hill more ammunition by having Jeff Sessions recuse himself.
Okay, well, let's get the view now from Moscow with CNN's Matthew Chance. Matthew, good morning to you. Donald Trump's been accused, or described rather, as being frustrated, being angry. I'm wondering, is an angry US president the kind of man the Kremlin can work with?
Well, I guess not, in the sense that, you know, these revelations that are constantly bombarding the White House and the toxic nature of the issue of Russia when it comes to American politics means that from a Russian point of view, there's a lot of concern about what effect that's going to have on the policy of the White House. Remember, they believed, Russian officials believed, that Donald Trump was going to be a president of the United States who was going to be relatively pro-Russian. He'd spoken during his campaign about criticising NATO, about recognising Crimea potentially as part of Russia, about cooperating with Russia on a whole range of issues, including international terrorism. But because of the way the political situation in the United States has developed, there has been a gradual realisation in Moscow that that's probably not going to happen. Now, the Kremlin always said that it didn't view the presidency of Donald Trump with rose-tinted spectacles, but the Russian media was, you know, overwhelming in its praise of Donald Trump, looking forward to a new period of warm relations between Washington and Moscow. That's all now completely disappeared from the Russian media, which is, of course, largely state-controlled. And the Kremlin are speaking, and Russian officials are talking in terms of a witch hunt in the United States and propaganda aimed at soiling the image of Russia. And so the idea that this is going to be a close cooperative relationship, which is an idea that was earlier held, has now vanished.
So much speculation, Matthew, about the meetings that took place with the Russian ambassador to the US, Sergei Kislyak. Is there concern, though, in Russia that there are going to be more revelations to come and that this particular individual is going to undergo even more of a character assassination than he's already had?
Well, I think there must be. I mean, obviously, there are a lot more meetings between Russian officials, including Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to Washington, and Trump officials than we earlier understood. I mean, it's emerging almost by the day that there were more contacts that weren't previously disclosed. The Russians, of course, say that this is just the normal part of diplomatic activity. Their ambassador to Washington, as their other diplomats, have the job of making contacts with prominent people from the United States, particularly people from the incoming, what was then the incoming Trump administration. And they say they're doing nothing wrong and that this is just a witch hunt to manipulate the perception of those contacts. But yes, I mean, look, and this is going to be very difficult. It's obviously this issue of Russia is a problem for Donald Trump that does not seem to be going away.
Certainly doesn't. Matthew Chance live for us in Moscow. Thank you. Now, people gathered in support of President Trump in at least 28 states on Saturday. Most of the rallies were peaceful, but inside Minnesota's state capital, 6 anti-Trump protesters were arrested after clashing with his supporters. 10 people were also arrested at a rally in Berkeley, California. Police there confiscated a number of weapons as well. Protesters argued with each other at many of the rallies, while with mild fighting reported just at some. Peter Trubowitz is a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics, where he's also a director of the United States Centre. Joins me now in the studio. Peter, welcome to you. Thank you for coming in this morning. President Trump has been described by many after these wiretapping allegations as an angry man, a frustrated man. I'm wondering which president wins through, though. Is it the angry, erratic, or the calm, contrived Trump, who's perhaps deliberately putting this kind of information out there?
Well, I think that Trump demonstrated again yesterday that he can be his own worst enemy. I mean, if the purpose of the series of tweets was to take the story about Jeff Sessions and particularly the Attorney General's decision to recuse himself off the front page, off the top of the fold, I think Trump succeeded in doing that, but only by making himself the story, by charging former President Obama with Watergate-style crimes. What Trump has actually done is raise the question of whether the FBI got court approval to investigate people that were part of the Trump campaign.
Right, and that would be a legal wiretapping.
It would be a legal wiretap. So this thing just comes back at Donald Trump. That's why Republicans were running for cover yesterday.
Yeah, and talking about Jeff Sessions as well, as much as Donald Trump may be trying to divert away from the Russia story, it isn't going away. He has recused himself, Jeff Sessions has, from the investigation. But is there now a bigger call than ever before for a special prosecutor, an independent prosecutor, to come in and look at this?
Yeah, I mean, we've already heard that yesterday. That drumbeat is going to continue. This story's got legs. It's not going away. And it seems to me that Trump's efforts here, while they may work in a kind of tactical, from a day-to-day standpoint by changing the story, what it does is it reminds Americans that there's an issue there. I mean, polls are showing that Americans, even Americans who support him, wonder about what the heck is going on with the Russians.
Yeah, as I've seen, there's this prevailing theme of dishonesty, even if you're a Trump supporter, prevailing this theme of dishonesty and distrust coming throughout the White House. Even now, with the Vice President Mike Pence being implicated with his emails and his use of a private email server for state information and state.
Right, but we need to separate that from the Russia story. But I mean, I suppose if you're Vice President Pence today, you can, thank your lucky stars that the president, your boss, is taking up all the oxygen with the Russia story, because, I mean, this is, you can see why Pence's critics are charging him with hypocrisy. I mean, he hammered Hillary Clinton during the campaign for her use of a private server and private emails. And while it's not exactly the same thing, his use of AOL, it's pretty damn close.
And for most
Americans, they're not going to, but most Americans are not going to draw that kind of distinction. That's splitting hairs with, with an axe. And I think, the bottom line here is you live in a glass house, you don't throw stones.
It's Sunday, everyone's hunkered down in Mar-a-Lago in the Winter White House, as it's been dubbed. At the moment, Donald Trump, the president's there. Jeff Sessions, I believe, is there as well. Steve Bannon. What's going to be the tactic looking ahead to Monday?
Well, I think there's two possible stories that'll occupy tomorrow and Tuesday. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the revised travel ban being announced as early as tomorrow. The particulars are not known there, but the administration now has every incentive in a tactical sense to change the story by putting that out. Tuesday, they're supposed to unveil the rollback of EPA regulations, and that's going to light up things, that's going to generate tremendous attention by the media and at state and local levels as well.
Okay, plenty more to come then. It's not going away. None of these stories are. Peter Trubowitz, thanks very much for coming in this morning. Now, coming up here on CNN Newsroom, the Red Cross says it's deeply alarmed by a suspected chemical attack in Mosul in Iraq, what it means for residents fleeing the city ahead, plus the deepening mystery over why senior Trump advisors met with Russia's ambassador but never said anything about those meetings until now. From certain Middle Eastern and African countries. Two sources say they expect Mr. Trump to revoke the original ban. And a spokesman for U.S. President Barack Obama says there's no truth to allegations the Obama administration spied on Donald Trump during last year's presidential campaign. Mr. Trump unleashed a barrage of tweets early on Saturday, accusing his predecessor of tapping his phones in Trump Tower. Mr. Trump provided no evidence to back up the allegation. His staff apparently was blindsided when he sent out the tweets early on Saturday morning, including this one, quote, "How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate. Bad or sick guy?" Now, the president's tweets coincide with a deepening mystery over why senior Trump aides met last year with Russia's ambassador to the United States. Among them was Jeff Sessions. He is now the U.S. Attorney General. Mr. Sessions went to Florida on Saturday to meet with Mr. Trump, who is said to be upset that the Russia story is overshadowing his presidency. We get more now from our Randy Kay.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
That was President Donald Trump last month, brushing off any connection to Russia. But since he made that statement, it's become clear that 5 of his advisors did indeed have contact with a Russian. This man, the Russian ambassador U.S. intelligence officials consider a top-level spy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions met with Ambassador Sergei Kislyak in July and September and is now having to explain why he didn't share that during his confirmation hearings.
In retrospect, if I should have slowed down and said, but I did meet one Russian official a couple of times, that would be the ambassador.
On the heels of that, more undisclosed meetings, this time at Trump Tower. That's where Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, met with the Russian ambassador in December. Also in on that meeting, the former head of the NSA, Michael Flynn, who was fired for misleading the administration about his conversations with the ambassador. A senior administration official tells CNN Kushner's meeting lasted about 10 minutes and characterized it as an introductory meeting, an inconsequential hello.
Why does any of this matter? Because at least some of those meetings with the Russian ambassador occurred while the Trump administration's relationship with Russia was under close scrutiny. And despite pushback from the White House, there are still some questions about whether or not Russia influenced the U.S. presidential election.
I think that Russia's involvement and activity has been investigated up and down. So the question becomes, at some point, if there's nothing to further investigate, what are you asking people to investigate?
How many times do I have to answer this question?
Can you just say
Russia
yes or no
is a ruse. Yeah, I know you have to get up and ask a question, so important. Russia is a ruse. I have nothing to do with Russia.
So what about that growing list of private meetings with the Russian ambassador? Trump campaign national security advisor J.D. Gordon has disclosed that he too met with Kislyak at the Republican National Convention in July. He emphasized there wasn't any inappropriate chatter with the Russians to help the Trump campaign. And there's more. He says 2 other national security advisors were also part of that meeting, Walid Phares and Carter Page. More meetings and more denials only leads to more questions.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability.
Randy Kaye, CNN, Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay, well, Jacob Parakilis is assistant head of the US and the Americas program at Chatham House here in London. Joins me now on set. Thanks very much for coming in, Jacob. We need to talk about Russia, of course, just following on from Randy's report there. But I want to just quickly mention the wiretapping allegations. This is quite unprecedented, isn't it, to have a sitting president accuse his predecessor of a crime?
It's hugely unprecedented. And if Obama had accused George W. Bush, if George W. Bush had accused Bill Clinton of this kind of thing, this would be a massive break. But it is sort of in keeping with Trump's tradition that he's established. He's willing to sort of throw out these wild, outlandish accusations to either not provide proof or to promise to provide proof and then quietly just sort of let things, and then to move on.
Yeah.
So this is kind of how things work now. It's sort of in keeping with that.
He's hoping to get away from the Russia story, but it's simply not going away. Jeff Sessions has now recused himself from the investigation, but there are other people, as we were just hearing Randy's report, who may now come out as saying that they did indeed have these meetings with Russians. One of them perhaps being the president's son-in-law as well.
Yeah, and in Sessions' case, the interesting thing is there's nothing inherently wrong with a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee meeting with the Russian ambassador. You know, United States senators meet with foreign ambassadors. It's a perfectly normal part of practice, especially those on the Armed Services Committee, on the Foreign Relations Committee, that have to do with appropriations related to U.S. military deployments, U.S. foreign affairs, and so on and so forth. The problem is that Sessions said things that were untrue about it in his hearing. He went out of his way to deny in a question from Al Franken, then he explicitly denied any meetings in a written question from Patrick Leahy. So that's the problem. It's the denials, not the acknowledgement that conversations were had with the Russians.
And that would be the difference then between Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, as well. He's never had to go through a confirmation hearing, and so he's never had the opportunity to lie or tell the truth or whatever it is under oath.
Right. Most people in the West Wing are not confirmed by the Senate. They are appointed by the president. They are subjected to an apolitical security clearance process, and they're put in their jobs.
The travel ban, which was much lauded by President Trump a couple of weeks ago and has since been held up in the courts and the like, it's been delayed quite a lot. And although the president had said that it was an urgent requirement to keep the American people safe, what's the latest in it? And might we see some development this week even?
The story is that it'll come out this week, possibly as soon as Monday. Last week, the story was that it would come out in the middle of the week. Then it was pushed back, apparently, and this is based on reporting in Politico, apparently because they didn't want to interrupt the news cycle around the president's joint address to Congress. So the deadline has been pushed back. Now, if this is undergoing legal review, if the issue is they want to make sure that it's more legally secure than its predecessor, that's one thing. But to say that they're pushing it back because they want it to have a news cycle of its own slightly undermines the case that it's an urgent, critical national security requirement.
There is also quite a lot of concern amongst Democrats and others who are criticising the administration at the moment about the sources of information that the president is using. Some allegations that this wiretapping story first came about through Breitbart. Now, of course, Steve Bannon is his chief strategist and used to be the head of Breitbart as well. I mean, what do you make of who President Trump is turning to get his information right now?
It's very difficult to tell. I mean, you can draw these inferences, and I think there have been a couple of fairly strong cases that, you know, things that were mentioned on particular segments on Morning Joe, on Fox and Friends, on specific shows, have led directly to presidential tweets. Now, how that goes into policymaking is a little bit more opaque, and frankly, it should be opaque. The president should have a little bit of privacy to determine, you know, any president, any party should have a little bit of privacy to absorb information, but it is a little bit concerning, the link between Steve Bannon, who was, until the Trump campaign, the head of Breitbart, and the fact that Breitbart has sort of unprecedented access into the White House. And, you know, the diversity of sources is another question there. How broad a range of opinion is the president taking in?
Another example of that would be, of course, the Sweden story as well, and that coming apparently from Fox and Friends in a segment that he'd seen the previous day as well. Very interesting. Jacob Parakilas, rather. Thank you very much for joining us this Sunday morning. Thank you. Now, the new U.S. immigration crackdown is raising emotions on both sides of the issue. Some call the Trump administration's efforts cruel, but the man you're about to meet fully supports deporting undocumented immigrants. He lost his teenage son to murder at the hands of one of them. CNN's Sarah Seidner has his story.
Good thing. Donald Trump made Jamil Shaw Sr. a promise. Has Mr. Trump, as president, kept his promise?
Yes, he told me my son's life would not be in vain.
Mr. Trump promised if he became president, he'd do whatever he could to keep other families from experiencing what the Shaws did. How did you find out that your son had been shot?
I heard it. I heard the gunshots, and I just knew. All of a sudden, pow, pow, woo! I remember saying, damn.
In 2008, Shaw's eldest son, Jamil Jr., a standout high school running back preparing for college, was shot to death, execution style, by 19-year-old Pedro Espinosa, who had just been released from jail a day earlier on a charge of assault with a deadly weapon. But the city did not hand him over to immigration authorities then. Who do you blame besides the actual person who killed your son for the death of your son?
Anybody supports sanctuary cities. 3 gun charges, stabbed people. I mean, he was just Satan's disciple and illegal in the country, in the gang database. Come on, man, do your damn job. All you have to do is just get him out of here.
Shaw has been fighting ever since to get Jamil's law passed that targets undocumented immigrants who join gangs. Fast forward to 2015, and Shaw got a chance to hand his proposal to then-candidate Donald Trump. Then, in President Trump's joint address to Congress, he recognized Shaw and offered this.
I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called VOICE, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement.
Some Democrats groaned and booed the new office.
I took it as an insult. Why wouldn't that be a good idea to have a department set up for those people? Obama, for victims. Obama was using that same money for the DACA people.
What do you think about the Dreamer program?
The Dreamer murdered my son. He was brought here by no fault of his own. You know, he grew up to be 19, and he murdered somebody. So you can't just say, blanket, that all dreamers are good people.
But critics of Trump's immigration stance say his focus is misplaced, pointing to several studies listed by the Cato Institute, all showing immigrants are less crime-prone than those who are native-born.
What I care about statistics, my son is in the cemetery. I'm not saying all illegals are doing that, but we got enough trouble trying to with Americans. and you're going to import more?
One of those studies looking at census data from 1980, 1990, and 2000 showed that immigrants as a whole have incarceration rates that are 1/5 those of native-born Americans. But Mr. Shaw says statistics wouldn't matter to you if it was your child who was killed. The man who killed his child was sentenced to death and is serving time in San Quentin Prison here in California. Sarah Seidner, CNN, Los Angeles.